Hello, at 1,000 subscribers, I will make a special series of stories for you. The prairie made a furnace of noon and a mirage of everything else. Heat swam over the flats in trembling sheets, bending far cottonwoods into wavering ghosts and turning cattle into lowing, heat-struck clouds. The herd pushed east in a ragged, brown river, ribs showing, tongues lolling. Iron shoes clicked and scuffed over stone. Leather creaked. Somewhere a meadowlark tried a brave little song and gave up halfway. Gus spotted her first. Gus had a way of seeing what others would rather leave alone. Ant mounds, bad trail signs, the white glint of bone. "What in hell?" he muttered, pulling his sorrel up short. Dust drifted by him like smoke. "There's a party of one comin'." Out of nowhere, Decker reined in beside him, squinting. Decker's face had the color and contour of a half-burnt plank, all creases and judgment. He spat, neat as punctuation. "That ain't a party. That's trouble shaped like a woman. Luke." Anders came last, posting easy on a flea-bit gray with ears too big for any honest horse. He was the youngest by a decade, clean-jawed where the others were bearded or wind-scraped. A man who still felt that choices mattered. He lifted the brim of his hat with a knuckle, peered through the yellow air, and saw her. She was a smudge. At first, skirt torn, hatless, boots slurred by the dust, like she didn't know what a step was for anymore. The sun found the blood on her dress and polished it into a dark coin. She held herself at the ribs with both hands, the way a child holds a secret. And when she stumbled, she didn't catch herself, just took the ground as if it had a right to her dot. No one moved. A bumblebee tuned the silence. "Bad idea," said Sutter, a thick man with fingers swollen around his reins. "You haul dying strays. You invite who shot them. Or whatever they was running from," added Pike, who had a cough he couldn't quit and a voice like rust. "We ain't a church wagon. We're a cow outfit." They watched her sink to her knees between two mesquite, head down, shoulders working like a bellows. She raised her face once chapped lips, skin the pale of someone who'd once known shade. Her eyes found the men the way a drowning person finds a pier. Becker's horse sidestepped under him, impatient. "We got a date at the Cimarron crossing, and 3 days of river-to-belly-high heat besides. Ain't got water for charity." Luke's canteen thumped against his thigh. He could feel the slosh, not as weight, but as question. His horse swished, its tail listening. The herd shifted as if the earth itself were tired of standing. Gus shaded his eyes. "She's hit." The word fell like a stone. It made a simple shape of a complicated thing. "She's not ours," Decker said. "Not our bullet, not our problem." The woman tried to stand and failed. The effort ripped a sound out of her that wasn't a cry so much as a surrender. She put her hands on the ground and stayed there a second, like she was praying into the dust. When she lifted her head again, Luke could see that her mouth had formed the shape of water. No sound, just the shape. Luke swung his leg over and dropped to the ground. "Boy," Decker snapped, "all officer and older brother. Don't." Luke didn't answer because his mouth couldn't reach his thoughts fast enough. He walked. Each step ran him through a tally. His ration. They're miles to the crossing. The way men's eyes change when you decide the wrong thing. Dust rose around his boots like moths. The woman raised a hand that didn't make it halfway up, fingers stained and shaking. "Miss," Luke said, stopping a yard away as if she might spook. He crouched, hat pushed back, gray horse watching with one soulful eye over his shoulder. Up close the heat smelled like copper and juniper. Her breath came hot and shallow. Sweat salt whitened the hollow above her lip. There was a hole in her. Dressed near the short ribs, the fabric torn and blackened. Flies worried the edges. He shooed them without thinking. She looked at his canteen like it contained all the years she'd planned to live. Luke tugged the cork with his teeth, poured a slow finger into his palm and wet her lips with it, and her tongue, then the corners of her mouth. She sucked at the water without grace. Some spilled onto her dress, and it might as well have been. A miracle the way her eyes closed under a dot behind him. The men murmured the way cattle do when a rider goes too near a cactus patch. He could feel the weight of their thinking, the hot stare on it. Luke poured again, a little more. Careful. First swallow is for hope. The second is for the body. Her throat worked. A cough tried to take her, caught on pain, and let go. She blinked up at him. It felt like she was trying to fix his face in her mind, and the world kept bucking under her. Easy, Luke said. You're all right. He knew it was a lie, and said it anyway. You learn to issue small, useful lies on the trail. Decker's horse clanked up behind him. We done playing nurse? Luke didn't look back. He pulled his bandana free, shook it to lose the trail dust, and pressed it above the wound. The cloth reddened like a fast sunrise. She's bleeding, he said, as if it were new information, as if naming it could halt it. Someone else's mess, Pike said. I don't want the kind of people who make a mess like that. You think the kind of people who shoot women care about who you want? Gus asked, soft and mean, in the same breath. He was a man split down the middle, one half frightened. Of the world, one half guilty for it. Luke slipped an arm under her shoulders. She gave a broken sound. A hinge hung crooked. I'm gonna get you in the shade, he said. You hear? Her eyes fluttered. The flutter looked like yes. He lifted. She was lighter than she looked, or else his blood had gone loud enough to make him stronger. Her head fell against his chest, and he could smell her hair sunburned straw. Dust, a faint sting of gunpowder that hadn't finished telling its story. The heat offer was wrong. Not the warm bread heat of a body working, but the furnace-like heat of a body failing. The creek bed lay a dozen yards off, a dry, twisted scratch. Through the land with cottonwood roots, like black bones reaching for something that had forgotten them. Shadow pooled under the cut bank. Luke carried her there and set her down on the cool side, propping her against a sandstone shelf. Slow, he told himself. Gentle, the way you set down something fragile that belongs to someone else. Decker dismounted, with the air of a man who planned to supervise a mistake until it ended. He came down the slope in the careful way of old knees and long grudges. You aiming to put us all up on a boot hill? He asked, because this is how you write the first chapter. Luke shot him a glance that had more steel than youth usually has. She dies here, he said. That's on us. Not the man who put the lead in her. You going to carve that on your headstone? Died of other man's sins? Decker squatted, took in the wound with an appraiser's look, and hooked his thumb toward the horizon. That shot came from close. Powder scorched the cloth. 2 hours old, maybe 3. Whoever fired it ain't walking slow. Gus's whistle was low and tuneless. I don't hear birds out there. Pike coughed his sawmill cough. I hear. U.S. getting picked like needy chickens. Luke rinsed his bandana with 2 hard shakes of water wasteful to some eyes, necessary to his, and set the cool cloth against the wound again, firmer. The woman's fingers dug into the dirt. He covered her hand with his, pinning it the way you soothe a horse before you pull out a thorn. Ma'am, he said, can you breathe deep for me? Her breath hitched and sawed. A whisper came that. Wasn't a word yet. Another try, the sound like paper. He leaned in so the others couldn't see that he wanted the answer more than anything. The whisper broke on the first syllable of something that might have been a place, or just pain. He felt it against his shirt, the damp heat of it. Easy, he said, because he had no other tools. The herd shifted again, hooves drumming. Flies rode the movement like drunk sailors. The smell of cattle urine rose sweet and rank, a reminder that the world was large and disgusting and indifferent. Decker tipped his hat back with 2 fingers, reading Luke like a ledger. You got a plan that ain't pour and pray? Luke swallowed. The water in his canteen had grown heavier just by being talked about. We give her shade and a little water and a clean rag until she can travel. Then we. What? Sutter called from the rim. Tie a ribbon on her and give her to the sheriff? We ain't police. We're men trying to make a job finish. We're men, Luke said. He hadn't meant to say it. It hopped out and stood there between them like a dare. Job don't change that. Decker's jaw worked sideways, like he was grinding a pebble. There's a line, he said finally. I spent my life learning to recognize it. You step over too many times, and one day you look back, and there ain't no line left. Luke looked down at the woman. The bandana was wet and going darker. Maybe the line ain't where you think it is, he said. Gus rubbed his neck and stared at the east, where heat stacked itself into glass towers. I seen a thing once, he said, to nobody in particular. Up on the Pecos, woman stumbled into camp with a kid hanging off her like a burr, shot clean through the meat of the shoulder. We gave her water. She didn't make it. Kid did. Grew up to throw a rope in ways I ain't never seen before. Married a schoolteacher. I think about that when I think about water. Pike wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, offended by the story. I think about how a bullet likes to bring brothers. Brothers, bosses, Decker said. Men who think they own what they ruin. He looked straight at Luke. Whoever did this is close. They see us hovering and they'll pin the whole business to our chest. Luke didn't flinch from the thought because it had already been in him since he saw the hole in her dress. They can try, he said, but they don't get to write how we act. Decker stared a long time. The wind found a trickle through the creek bed and made a thin flute sound in the roots. At last he blew out a breath that might have been a laugh if someone less tired had made it. You haul her, he said. You tend her. You answer for it if ghosts ride up. We ain't spilling our water for a stranger at high noon. He stood, knees complaining, and climbed the bank. Bless me, Gus said, almost smiling. The old man's merciful today. He's tired, Pike replied. Mercy and tired look just alike till somebody pays the tab. Alone in the shade. With her, Luke checked the wound by touch. Not sight, no use opening the cloth to flies. Entry under the ribs, left side. No exit he could find. The gulf between what he knew about cattle and what he knew about people yawned like a canyon. He felt along her spine for the stiffness of mortal things and found only the ordinary give of a body that wanted to live. I'm going to carry you, he told her. We gotta better hollow up the draw. There's a seep sometimes. Maybe today. It remembers us. He took the bandana, folded it, tucked it firm. Then he slid his arms under her again. She tried to help, which was worse than not trying at all, and he hushed her with a sound he'd used on terrified colts. The climb back, up made his thighs burn and the world flash at the edges, but he kept his step even. The men parted to let him pass. They didn't nod. They didn't look away either. Sutter rode on ahead, angry at the road itself. Pike fell to the rear, where men who expect ambush like to keep an eye. Decker took the left flank with a watchman's grimness. Gus hummed something and pretended not to be watching Luke's back. The draw bit into the land like a failed promise, its mouth thick with willow scrub and baked mud. 30 yards up, where the shade clung longer, a trickle gave itself up along a ledge of stone, no more than a thread of clear crawling water, but it had polished itself a clean path as if convinced at its own importance. Their last pass-through had found it dry. Today it remembered. Luke went to his knees beside it, let his hat hang on its stampede string, and wetted his bandana, ringing it slow over her lips, and her brow, then the pulse at her throat. He set her down so her head lay a little higher, and her heart, the way he'd seen a real doctor do once in a mining camp when a man took a pickaxe to the chest. The woman breathed a fraction easier. The fraction felt like a gift. He washed the dust off his hands in a poundful of seep water, careful as a priest, and pressed the cloth where it needed to be. The bandana steamed in the shade. The air around them lost a degree. Give her a swallow. For mine, Gus said, appearing with a second canteen like a magician with a dove. I ain't a saint, but my ma raised me with a switch. Pike made a disgusted sound in his throat and turned his horse to watch the horizon. Luke looked up at Gus and nodded once. Thank you. He tipped a mouthful past her lips. She took it greedily, then coughed hard, the kind of cough that makes a man want to catch pain with his hands. He steadied her and waited for the hurt to leave her face. Don't you go emptying it. Gus warned, but his voice had none of its usual thorns. The prairie widened around them, a great empty plate with a horizon set edge to edge like iron. Heat shimmered. The herd settled, the cud-chewing sound like rain imagined. Somewhere beyond sight, flies traced their cruel invisible maps. Luke wet the cloth again and told her the truth he could offer. You ain't alone no more, he said. Quiet. Not while I can carry you. Her eyes opened at that. Just a sliver. Just enough to show the color of river stones, and fixed on him. The look wasn't grateful. It wasn't pleading. It was astonished, like she'd miscounted what the world contained and found for them I see. First time in a long time that the sum did not come up empty. Decker's voice came from the bank above, flat as Kansas. Eat while you can, he called down. We move when we have a shadow big enough to stand in. Crossin' still ahead. And the day ain't getting shorter. Luke nodded, though Decker couldn't see it. He didn't take his hand from the cloth. You hear that? He murmured to the woman. There's time yet. Her mouth moved. The sound she made was shaped like a word, but it didn't arrive whole. It touched his ear like a moth and fled into the light. He leaned closer. The whisper. Scraped up again, broke, and left behind only 2 syllables of a name or a place. Too soft to keep. Say it later, he told her, and hoped later existed. Save your breath. He looked down the draw, where the land opened like a stage, and looked up, where the sky pressed down like a lid. He could feel choices arraying themselves like cards. The backs all the same, the faces different and dear. The men, the herd, the dry miles to come. The other riders who might be hunting the hurt they'd left behind. Luke wrung the cloth once more, and set it to the wound with a care that was bigger than the piece of cotton he held. He watched her chest rise, fall, and rise again. He didn't count the breaths. He just made sure there was always one more. And when the shadow finally slid long across the draw, giving them permission to move, Luke Anders was already standing with her in his arms. By late afternoon, the sun lost some of its bite, but none of its silence. The seep kept crawling out of rock, as if it were shy about the favor. Luke stayed crouched in the dark wedge of the cut bank, one hand on the cloth, the other steadying the woman's shoulder when pain tried to shrug her away from herself. Her breathing improved from ragged to merely thin. A fly lit on her cheekbone, and Luke brushed it off with the back of a knuckle. She flinched, then stilled, eyes half open, the color of creek stones. What's your name? He asked finally, voice pitched quiet like he was talking to a skittish. Colt. Her lips shaped air first, then syllables. Ma-ree. Ah. Mariah, he repeated, as if saying it could keep it from slipping away. I'm Luke Anders. A small nod pain clipped it short. Her pupils slid to the canteen. He tilted a careful swallow onto her tongue, then another. The second one she managed without coughing. A speck of strength came back to her face like a lantern rekindled. Above, the men moved in the slow, showy way of people pretending not to watch. Decker had his hat off, fanning himself with it. Sutter unlaced and relaced a boot with the kind of fury you save for things that can't argue back. Pike looked at the open country so hard it ought to have confessed something. Gus rolled tobacco and didn't light it. Luke lifted a corner of the cloth. The wound was angry in the way fresh harm gets angry, fast edges grind dark, a little swelling. The hole sat high under the left ribs, the scorch mark around it saying the muzzle had been close. He didn't go hunting for the bullet. A man on. The trail learns which bravery is just ego in costume. He rinsed the bandana in the seep. Mariah watched him like people watch a gambler's hands. Can you tell me what happened? Luke asked, not because she owed him a story, but because words keep a body anchored. We come on you alone. How long have you been out? She drew breath through her teeth. It sounded like paper tearing. Since morning, she swallowed. Night before. You've been walking since then? Luke couldn't keep the disbelief out of his voice. Bleeding? Something that might have been a smile tugged a corner of her mouth. I didn't like the other option. He huffed out a breath that was almost a laugh and wasn't. Fair. Enough. Her focus drifted past him and then snapped back, as if she'd remembered the work of living. She reached for his wrist and missed it by a finger's width. I need a lawman, she said, pushing each word up a hill. Sheriff. Callahan. Silver Bend. Luke nodded slow. I know the town. Couple days if a horse is willing. We'll get you there? At the name, Decker came down the bank like a verdict, boots feeling for each step. Hear that? He said. Silver Bend. He squatted, knees popping. Why him? Mariah's eyes moved to his face. They tracked the old scars there, the way a person takes a measure without meaning to. He knew my pa. Before, said he'd help if ever. If ever the Macreadys. She had to stop and breathe. At that name, even half made something. Mean and careful passed between the men, the way cold passes through iron. Gus blew out his unlit smoke. Well, Pike's cough scraped the bank. Here it comes. Decker didn't move. Only his jaw did. The Macreadys, he repeated, like turning over a coin to see if it's counterfeit. They put that hole in you. Mariah blinked, a single slow movement that gave her away more than any yes. They came at dawn, 6 of them, black dusters. My pa said we'd have papers settled by harvest. Macready said harvest belonged to him either way. Pa told me to take the mare and ride for Callahan. I rode. Her mouth flattened. Pa didn't. The words lay between them with the weight of a body. Luke felt his hands want to do something and knew there was nothing to do about a past made of minutes. What papers? Decker asked. Not gentle, not cruel, just the arithmetic of a man who wants variables named. Mariah's gaze slid sideways, measuring him back. Her fingers pressed the dirt, then let it go. Survey, deed, water. They don't just want what you can see, she said. They want the map in the ground that says who gets to drink next year. Sutter spat. We driven cattle east to men who ask us if they're fat, not to men who ask us about the bones of the land. Gus tipped his head. Water makes bones. Pike cut a hand through the air, impatient. Where are the rest of them? The men who rode with her? Gone, he answered himself, bitter. Same as her pa. And whoever shot her ain't gonna let the last witness wander into town to tell tales. He looked at Luke. You still feel like being charitable? Luke kept his eyes on Mariah. You got the papers? He asked, soft. Or did Macready take them? She didn't answer at first. What she did was glance down, almost nothing. A little arc of attention toward her boots before she dragged it back up. It was more than enough. Decker, Luke said without looking. Give me your knife. Decker studied him a long 3 seconds and flipped the bone-handled blade down, catching it by the spine before handing it hilt first. You cut her, I cut you, he said, and Luke believed he meant it kindly. I ain't cutting her, Luke said, and hooked his fingers under the seam of Mariah's right boot. The leather was dry and stubborn. He slid the blade under the stitching and worried a gap big enough to get 2 fingers in. Inside, where a lining should have been, his knuckles found paper wrapped in oilcloth. It made a dry, holy rustle against his skin. He looked up. Mariah had already been looking at him. In case I didn't make it, she said. Someone had to get them where law lives. Luke didn't pull the bundle free. He pressed it deeper and put the boot back in order as best he could and handed Decker his knife. They take her, he said. They take that. So they don't take her. Decker scratched the gray at his chin, watching Luke like a teacher deciding if the boy had learned the right lesson for the wrong reason. Silver bends a long way for one boy's conscience to carry unnecessary weight, he said. Not my conscience, Luke said, surprising himself with the heat of it. Her life. Decker stood, his knees more forgiving this time. Boy's fixed on his ruin, he told the sky. Always a tidy thing. Mariah's hand found Luke's wrist now and stayed. Her grip had the determined weakness of the newly. Drowning. My name, she said again, more whole. Mariah. She swallowed and finished it, the second half sticking like burrs. Mariah Reyes. Luke nodded. He'd keep the name clean in his head. All right, Mariah Reyes. She blinked hard, as if refusing tears their price. I didn't run because I'm afraid, she said. I ran because my father asked. I told him I would. He said Callahan would remember. He said men with papers ought to beat men with guns, but sometimes it needs both. Callahan ain't the worst the badge made, Gus offered from the bank. He's got a mean streak for men who use mean as their first argument. He and McCready have looked at one another like winter and spring on more than one street. Sutter snorted. Spring's just winter that forgot how to bite for a minute. Pike raised a hand, palm out. Talk less, he said, listening to the horizon with his bones. Hear that? They all went still. The herd's music hoof, low, chinch-head, found a lazy rhythm. The wind worried the willow scrub. Somewhere far off, a coyote tuned up. Then, under it, thin and particular like a nail on porcelain, a horseshoe. Catching stone. Decker's face turned into a map of every bad choice he'd survived. We move at sundown, he said. Soon as the light goes soft enough to hide us, but not so soft, we break a leg. We cut south through the basalt where sign is hard to read, then swing for Silver Bend once we got river under us. If we're lucky, whoever's hunting is dumber than we are. If we ain't, we'll have company by moonrise. Company's inevitable, Pike said. Luck is the decorative trim they tack on coffins. Gus stood and dusted his knees. I'll walk the ridgeline a half-mile and see if any fools are wearing dust like a flag. Take the small glass, Decker said, and don't be a hero. He looked down at Luke. You need whiskey? For the wound, Luke said. He didn't say, and for my hands, which would like an excuse to stop shaking. Decker tugged a flask from inside his vest, the cork tied to the neck with rawhide. You pour 3 drinks on her, and none for me. And we're enemies, he said. Without heat. Gus glass. Gus tossed a little spyglass down. Luke caught it and set it aside. He slid an arm under Mariah's shoulders and propped her further against the rock. This'll burn, he warned. She smiled, not the pretty. Kind, the gallows kind. I'm acquainted. He wetted the cloth with whiskey, breathed it inkhorn and lightning, and dabbed around the torn edge first, washing dust from skin with a care that would have made a surgeon's hands jealous. She hissed, jaw set so hard the muscles jumped. He cleaned again, then poured a thin measure directly onto the wound. She made no sound at all, which worried him more than a scream. Gus returned, shoulders a little tighter than when he left. 3 riders, he said, dropping beside the bank. 2 wearing long coats, though not as black as bedtime stories make them. Cutting north to south on the far ridge, not in a hurry. Could be anyone. Could be... He let it hang. How far? Decker asked. An hour if they know the ground, Gus said. 2 if they don't. Less if they pick up the same silence we're all listening to. Decker surveyed the trickle, the band of shade, the single boy holding the single woman, the hungry country around them that loved to watch men argue with it. Eat, he said again. Pack light. Every man carries water like he's married to it. Every man who complains, I'm married to something heavier. They chewed dry biscuits that pretended to be food and jerked beef that didn't bother pretending at all. Luke worked while he chewed, fashioning a sling from a stripped gunny sack and 2 willow switches soft enough to bend without breaking. Sutter watched in disapproval until the contraption began to look like it might actually hold a person. Then he pretended he'd been for it all along and brought down a better length of rope. Don't you go dropping her, Sutter said, like a man lending his tools to a cousin he mistrusted. It's hell dragging someone delicate over stones. I won't drop her, Luke said. You drop her, Sutter said. You ain't the kind of man who gets to call himself a man. After. That's enough, Decker said, not unkind to either of them. We're all going to be tired when we say hello to tomorrow. Save your splinters. Pike checked the loads on his Winchester, not looking up while he spoke. What's the plan? When the black coats gain our smell? Same plan we always have, Decker said. Don't die. Make 'em want to be anywhere we ain't. If that don't suit, improvise. Night shouldered its way in at last. Heat fled the low places first, leaving the high ground warm and the wash below almost kind. Stars came on without asking permission. Luke slid Mariah into the sling and tested the weight. It plucked every sore string in his back and still somehow tuned him to something steadier. You ready? He asked her. Her lashes lifted. She looked less like a person and more like a promise. To be won if afforded the chance. Silver Bend, she said, and the 2 words sounded like a prayer someone had taught her by hand. We'll go toward it, Luke said. Every step. They moved. The herd, urged by Sutter and Decker with low, constant sounds, swung into a slow night drive, hooves thudding like a choir of muffled drums. Gus ranged lazy to the right, which meant he was paying attention. Pike took the left, where shadows stack and trouble likes to live. Luke walked just inside the line of cattle, where he could borrow the mass of animals as a kind of moving wall. He kept the sling steady, one hand bracing Mariah's shoulder when the ground jolted her. Wind sang a thin wire song through the basalt fields. Somewhere, out beyond the hump of land that looked like a sleeping bison, coyotes held a meeting, and reached no conclusions. Once Luke thought he heard the far echo pop of a carbine, but it might have been a stone surrendering to night's cold. Mariah dozed and woke in stutters, as if the dream of walking and the fact of being carried couldn't agree. Which one owned her? Once, in a lucid moment, she grabbed Luke's sleeve with surprising strength. My father, she said. He wasn't perfect, but he kept the creek clean and the books honest. He said a man's word should be as heavy as water. McCready laughed. Said water don't weigh a thing out here unless you stack it with guns. Luke felt anger pick up its tools inside him and set to work. My pa used to say the land remembers, he told her. He was wrong about a lot. He might have been right about that. She breathed a laugh that hurt her. Then let it remember. This. When the moon climbed, a coin catching on the rim of the world, Gus ghosted back to them. Ridge riders cut off, he said. Either lost us or went to fetch friends. Fetch, Pike repeated, like a curse. Decker adjusted the brim of his hat and kept the herd moving. He didn't speed them. A herd is a decision you choose again every minute, until you get where you said you would. We make the dry wash. By midnight, he said, we lay quiet till dawn rubs color back into things. Luke, you keep our saint alive. I ain't a saint, Mariah murmured, eyes closed. Good, Decker said. Saints get remembered. We need you breathing. They reached the dry wash when Decker said they would, a white scar writhing through black country. The men bedded. The cattle as best they could, voices down to threads. Luke eased Mariah to the sand, found a spot where the bank shouldered wind off her. He checked the bandage. The cloth had gone a darker map, but not a flood. He poured a thimble of water for her and watched her take it like someone borrowing a treasure and intending to return it with interest. He tilted his head and listened. The night listened back. The herd settled into the slow pulse of ruminants, deciding to live another hour. Coyotes changed subject. Once, down the wash, a jackrabbit went from alive to not alive in a blink, leaving behind a short equation of sound. Luke let his eyes close and then thought better of it. He kept the half-open squint of men who want the dark to know they're still awake. He felt the weight of the boot with the papers near his knee. He thought about Sheriff Callahan, a tall man with a slow hand and a quicker temper. If memory served, and about McCree, whose shadow everyone knew despite him being only one man. Mariah's voice came out of the sand, thin but less ghost than before. You could leave me, she said. Ride your herd where it wants. No shame to it. Men do it every day and shake hands after. Luke watched a sheet of cloud slide across the moon and make the world 2 shades dimmer. I could, he said, but then I'd have to carry that a lot longer than I carry you. She turned her face toward him. In the middle of the night, with the smell of dust and cattle and the singe of whiskey between them, she smiled for real. It made her look like the person she'd been the morning before dawn ruined it. Then I owe you, she said. He shook his head, even though she couldn't see it. You owe me nothing. You get to Silver Bend and talk. That's the whole debt. Wind changed. Somewhere, far off, iron rang a little in the air again, not loud and not friendly. Decker's whisper came from the bank above, like a page turned. Heads up, he said. Shadows on the trail. Luke set his palm over the boot with the oilcloth and felt the paper's patient rustle against his skin. He put his other hand on the butt of his revolver and felt a different promise there. Between them, Mariah's breath counted out the longest fractions in the world. They waited for the dark to finish telling them which kind of night it meant to be. The night began still, as if the desert were holding its breath. Sand whispered under hooves, cattle murmured like a low tide, and the men rode with their shoulders hunched against the suspicion that silence itself could betray them. The moon, high and sharp-edged, painted the basalt ridges silver and turned every shadow into a thing worth fearing. Luke rode with Mariah, slung against him in the makeshift litter, the sway of the gray horse carefully matched to her shallow breathing. Each step seemed to echo louder than it should, as though the ground was amplifying their trespass. Every so often he bent close to her ear to whisper, "Almost there. Rest." Her lashes flickered, the only sign she heard him. Decker scouted ahead with the deliberate pace of a man who had buried too many who rushed. Pike rode left flank, Winchester across his lap, coughing every so often into the crook of his elbow, but never taking his eyes off the ridgeline. Gus drifted right, his silhouette merging with the dark pillars of basalt, scout and shadow both. Sutter labored with the herd, keeping the cattle pressed and calm, a low whistle threading through his teeth, like he was trying to charm snakes. For a time, it seemed possible they might slip clean through the night. Then, like thunder without. Clouds, a rifle cracked. The sound carried wrong in the canyon, too loud, too close, then tumbling into silence. A bullet sparked off rock above Decker's head, scattering stone chips. The herd bellowed and pressed into one another, restless hooves clattering. "Ridge!" Pike hissed, swinging his rifle up. "High ground, right side." A second shot answered, this one striking the dirt near Gus's horse. The animal reared, teeth flashing, and Gus barely got it under control. He returned fire in one smooth motion, muzzle flash briefly illuminating his jaw, clenched tight as iron. Luke ducked low over Mariah, shielding her body with his own. She stirred weakly, lips moving against his shirt. He couldn't hear the words over the gunfire, but he felt the tremor in her breath. "Don't let them take me. Keep her down." Decker barked, snapping his Colt from its holster. He fired twice at the ridge, shots measured, not wasted. "Sutter, hold the herd steady, or we're done before we start." "I'm trying." Sutter roared back, whip cracking. Cattle thundered in panic, hooves beating a wild drum that threatened to drown every other sound. Figures appeared on the ridgeline-long coats whipping in the desert wind, rifles glinting in the moonlight. 6 of them, dark shapes cut against. A pale sky. The McCready gang, their laughter carried down like something pulled from a grave. "Hand her over." One bellowed, voice thick with whiskey and hunger. "Ain't no use wasting good men for what's already ours." Luke's grip tightened on his revolver. His voice was steady when he answered, though inside his ribs, fear hammered. "She ain't yours. Then she die slower," came the reply, followed by a fresh volley of shots that sent sparks leaping from stone and cattle bawling in terror. Pike's Winchester cracked back, each shot deliberate. One rider on the ridge jerked and toppled, tumbling end over end down the slope. His scream cut short on rock. "That's one." Pike spat, coughing through his teeth. 5 left, meaner than before. Decker swung his horse behind a boulder, laying down cover fire with the calm rhythm of a man cashing checks. He couldn't afford to bounce. Gus circled wide, disappearing into shadow, his gun barking from a new angle moments later. He was trying to flank them. Luke had no choice but to move. He spurred the gray horse toward the canyon path, cradling Mariah close. Bullets kicked up, sand in ugly spurts beside him. One tore a hole through the tail of his coat. Another whined past his ear with the whisper of death narrowly refused. Mariah moaned, the sound faint but alive. "Silver Bend," she gasped. "Please, I'll get you there," Luke swore, though his throat was dry as the riverbed. He clutched the reins tighter, urging the horse to greater speed. Behind him, Decker shouted, "Go, we'll hold them." The herd, half mad with fear, surged in every direction. Sutter swung his whip desperately, trying to funnel them back into order, cursing louder than the cattle lowed. Pike reloaded with grim efficiency, shells clinking on stone, while Gus's shots came from unseen places, keeping the outlaws guessing. But the McCreadys were relentless. 2 of them urged their mounts down the slope, cloaks snapping behind them. Their rifles spat orange fire into the dark. One round grazed Luke's boot. Another tore through the litter's rope, nearly spilling Mariah. Luke yanked it tight with his free hand, teeth bared in determination. He wheeled the gray behind a jagged spur of basalt, pressing Mariah close against the stone for cover. He risked a glance. The outlaws were spreading, moving to surround. Decker's voice carried over the chaos. "Anders, you can't outrun all of 'em." Luke fired back a shot at one rider pressing close, the revolver bucking in his grip. The outlaw yelped and spun in the saddle, horse veering wild before disappearing. Into the dust. One less to outrun. Luke shouted, more to convince himself than anyone else. The gray horse trembled beneath him, nostrils flaring, foam flecking its lips. Luke stroked its neck with his free hand, whispering steady words, though his own heart was galloping faster. Then the animals. Mariah's hand clawed weakly at his sleeve. Her eyes, half open, fixed on him with fierce clarity. Don't let them win. He met her gaze, felt the weight of her trust anchor him in a world sliding toward chaos. Not while I breathe, he promised out above. The McCready gang regrouped, their silhouettes black and pitiless against the moon. More gunfire cracked, sparks lighting the night. Shadows stretched long, hungry, and unbroken, and Luke knew this was no skirmish. This was a chase that would not end until one side lay buried. The trail to Silver Bend felt longer than miles could measure. By dawn, Luke's gray horse stumbled with every step, sweat slicking its hide. Mariah lay slumped in the litter, her breath shallow but steady, each rise of her chest a fragile victory. The others had fallen behind Sutter with the herd, Gus watching the ridges, Pike coughing blood into his sleeve but refusing to stop. Decker alone stayed close, his revolver already drawn, his eyes scanning every shadow as if daring the desert to spit another. McCready at them. The land softened as they neared townless basalt, more scrub oak, the faint smell of water carried by the wind. For hours, Luke's world had been nothing but gunfire and dust. Now the shape of roofs on the horizon felt like a dream, a promise that might shatter if he blinked too hard. Silver Bend. The gray lurched down Main Street with Luke, half carrying, half dragging Mariah in his arms. Townsfolk scattered, murmuring, hands shading their eyes. By the time Luke stumbled onto the wooden planks of the saloon porch, his legs trembled like rotten fence posts, the doors banged open. A tall man with a sheriff's star pinned to his vest filled the frame. He had a jaw like quarried stone, a mustache black as spilled ink, and eyes that missed nothing. Good God Almighty, Sheriff Callahan muttered, striding forward. What in hell happened here? Luke collapsed against the doorframe, lowering Mariah to the nearest table. McCready's, he rasped. They killed her pa, left her for dead. She said your name. Callahan's face shifted, hardness overlaid with recognition. He leaned down, pressing his palm to Mariah's wound, steady as a man accustomed to blood, but not indifferent to it. Mariah Reyes, he said quietly, I knew your father. He had more backbone than sense. Her eyes fluttered, open at the sound, finding Callahan's face. Sheriff, she whispered, they took the land. Said papers meant nothing. Papa told me. Her breath caught, and Luke grabbed her hand, squeezing until she gripped back. Easy, Callahan soothed. You've done more than enough. You got here. That's the hardest part. He turned sharply. Doc, get your ass in here now. The town doctor bustled in, gray-haired and bleary, carrying a satchel that clinked like hope in a bottle. Women cleared the saloon table, sweeping aside cards and whiskey glasses. Someone brought linens, someone else water. The room shifted, from spectacle to purpose with the efficiency of frontier folk who had all buried someone once and weren't eager to do it again. Callahan straightened, looking at Luke. You carried her through McCready country? Luke nodded, too tired to frame it as anything noble. Didn't seem right to leave her? Right and easy ain't ever met, Decker muttered from the doorway, leaning on the frame like it was holding him up. Callahan's eyes flicked to him, then back to Luke. He studied the young cowboy as though weighing him against something. At last he said, You got grit, son. But grit won't stop what's coming. As if summoned, hoofbeats thundered into town. Dust boiled at the far end of Main Street. 6 riders' black dusters snapping in the wind pushed hard through the morning haze. The McCreadys had followed. Gunmetal glinted across saddles. The town went still. Shopkeepers slammed shutters, Mothers dragged children indoors. The piano in the saloon cut off mid-note. Silver Bend had seen its share of blood, and everyone knew the color it was about to wear again. Callahan stepped onto the boardwalk, hand resting on his revolver. His voice carried down the street, calm but edged. "McCready, this is my town. You ride in shootin'. You won't ride out." A laugh, high and mocking, answered him. The lead rider pulled off his hat, revealing hair. Long and black as coal, face lean and cruel. "Jeremiah McCready himself, Sheriff Callahan," he drawled. "Still pretending that badge means more than bullets?" He gestured behind him at the men in dusters. "We came for what's ours, the girl, and the papers she carries. Hand him over, and maybe we won't burn your pretty little town." To kindling. Luke shifted, hand hovering near his Colt. Behind him, Mariah stirred, her weak voice pushing through the saloon's noise. "Don't let them win." Callahan glanced at Luke, then at Decker, then back at McCready. His hand settled firm on his gun. "You already lost, Jeremiah," he said. "You just don't know it yet." The street held its breath. A tumbleweed skittered past like it couldn't stand to watch. Somewhere a horse snorted, impatient for violence. Then Steele sang. McCready's revolver flashed first, but Callahan was quicker. His gun barked, smoke curling from the barrel as Jeremiah jerked. Sideways in the saddle, his shot going wide. Luke dove for cover, pulling Mariah's litter behind the table as gunfire erupted in thunderclaps. The boardwalk exploded with splinters. Windows shattered. Decker fired from the saloon door, dropping one outlaw clean off his horse. Pike, coughing, blood but steady as iron, laid his Winchester on a railing and sent another McCready man spinning into the dirt. Gus, somewhere unseen, fired from a rooftop, each shot surgical, each outlaw ducking like they'd felt a ghost brush their neck. Luke found himself kneeling in the dust, revolver blazing, heart hammering in rhythm with the gun. He shot wild at first, then steadied, his aim guided by nothing more than sheer refusal to let Mariah's struggle be for nothing. One outlaw closed in on the saloon steps, pistol raised. Luke's bullet caught him in the chest, sending him tumbling backward in a bloom of dust. The street filled with smoke and screams and hoofbeats. Horses reared, men fell, iron sang until ears rang with it. Through the haze, Luke saw Jeremiah. McCready staggered back to his feet, blood seeping from his shoulder, eyes alight with murder. He raised his revolver toward Luke. Time slowed. The barrel gleamed. Luke's heart stopped. Then a single shot cracked sharp as lightning. McCready froze, eyes wide, before crumpling into the dust, his gun falling silent. Callahan lowered his smoking Colt, his jaw tight. Silence. The smoke thinned. The outlaws who could still ride spurred their horses and fled, their dusters whipping behind them like torn shadows. The townsfolk crept out from hiding, wide-eyed, murmuring. Silver Bend was safe for now. Luke staggered upright, chest heaving. His revolver hung limp in his hand. He turned toward the saloon, toward Mariah. She lay pale but alive. The doctor bent over her, hands working with quiet purpose. Her eyes fluttered open, catching Luke's face, and a faint smile tugged at her lips. "You kept your word," she whispered. Luke swallowed hard, lowering himself beside her. "I said I would." Sheriff Callahan stepped into the saloon, his star gleaming dull in the lamplight. He laid a hand on Luke's shoulder. "You've done more than most would, son, but this ain't over. McCready's gang won't quit easy, not until someone makes sure they can't get back up." Luke met his eyes. He felt the weight of dust, and blood and promise settle heavy in his chest. He thought of Mariah's father, gunned down over land and water. He thought of the men who had turned their horses away when she stumbled in the dirt, and he knew the fight had only just begun.